Spring break had never been something I cared much about. Most years, I just went home, caught up on sleep, maybe worked a bit to save money. But junior year was different. I was dating Maria Munoz, a girl who was everything I wasn't: wild, impulsive, electric. When she invited me to spend spring break in Puerto Rico with her family, I hesitated at first, but she convinced me with that mischievous smile of hers. I had no idea I was about to walk into something I would never forget. The moment we landed in San Juan, the humidity wrapped around me like a second skin. The city was a vibrant clash of colors, laughter, and music that never seemed to stop. Maria's family welcomed me like I was already one of their own, shoving food into my hands and teasing me about my terrible Spanish. But the real adventure began when Maria suggested we hike through El Yunque, the only tropical rainforest in the U.S. National Forest System. She promised me it would be an unforgettable experience. And she was right. Maria's mother drove us to the entrance and told us to call when we were ready to be picked up. The trail we planned to hike was supposed to be the best one, offering breathtaking views and hidden waterfalls. But when we arrived, a barricade blocked the entrance. Trail closed. Do not enter. Are you kidding me? Maria huffed, hands on her hips. There are other trails, I suggested. It's not a big deal. But Maria wasn't having it. This is the best one. The others are just boring. Then she turned to me with that look, the one that meant trouble. Let's just go in, she said. No one's around. I hesitated, but Maria's excitement was contagious. We were young, a little reckless, and it wasn't like we were hurting anyone. So we slipped past the barricade and started up the deserted path, laughing at how easy it was to break the rules. For a while, everything was perfect. Sunlight filtered through the thick canopy, casting dappled gold on the damp earth. The scent of wet leaves and distant flowers filled the air, and the sound of rushing water echoed somewhere beyond the trees. It felt like we had the entire rainforest to ourselves. Maria pulled a flask from her bag and took a swig before passing it to me. The rum burned in my throat, but in the best way. We were tipsy, lightheaded with laughter and the thrill of getting away with something we shouldn't. And then Maria screamed. She jumped back so suddenly that she nearly knocked me over. My heart leapt into my throat as I turned, following her wide-eyed stare to the ground ahead. It was an animal, or what used to be one. A mongoose lay sprawled across the path, its small body unnaturally stiff. But it wasn't the lifelessness that turned my stomach, it was the fact that its head was missing. I took a cautious step forward, hoping against hope that it was some sort of cruel prank. But the wound was clean, a perfect, precise cut. Not the work of another animal. A knife. Maria covered her mouth, her face pale beneath her sun-kissed skin. We should go, she stammered. I swallowed hard, nodding. The fun was gone. Our light-hearted rebellion soured into something darker. As we continued forward, Maria clutched my arm tightly. I could feel her tremble. I wanted to comfort her, but my mind kept turning over the details, the precision of the cut, the freshness of the body. Somebody did this. Somebody was here. We tried to shake it off, convincing ourselves that we were overreacting. Maybe a ranger had found the mongoose already dead and removed its head for some scientific reason. Maybe. We kept walking, but the rainforest didn't feel as welcoming anymore. The air was too thick, the shadows too deep. Every rustling leaf, every snap of a twig made me flinch. We hiked in silence for another mile. Maria's grip never loosened. Then she stopped. I can't do this, she whispered. I want to turn back. I didn't argue. I was dreading walking past that spot again, but we had no choice. The only way out was the way we came in. We retraced our steps, our pace much faster than before. The moment we rounded the bend where the mongoose had been, Maria buried her face in my shoulder. She didn't want to see it again, but it wasn't there anymore. The body was gone. A chill spread down my spine. I scanned the surrounding trees, suddenly hyper-aware of the weight of the silence. Then I saw it, hanging from a low branch just ahead. The mongoose, its paws bound together with thin twine, swaying gently in the breeze. Something dark dripped from its neck. I froze. Maria screamed. Before she could collapse, I grabbed her hand and ran. We ran as fast as we could. Something crashed through the underbrush behind us. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what it was. Then the scream came. Not from Maria. Not from me. It was a woman's scream, long, shrill, filled with terror. It came from somewhere ahead. Maria choked on a sob. What was that? I don't know, I gasped. Just keep running. The rainforest felt alive around us, pressing in, the humid air like a solid weight. I could hear Maria's ragged breaths, could feel her pulse hammering through our linked hands. Then I made the mistake of looking back, and I saw something move. A figure deep in the trees, watching us. I couldn't see its face, but I knew, deep in my gut, that whoever they were the reason we weren't supposed to be here. The scream came again, closer this time. We ran harder. The exit was so far away, and we were not alone. We ran. Maria's breath came in sharp, panicked gasps beside me, her fingers locked around my wrist like a vice. The rainforest blurred past us, branches whipping against my arms, roots clawing at my feet as if the jungle itself wanted to pull us down. That scream still echoed in my head. High, sharp, full of something beyond fear. And behind us, something was following. I didn't dare look back again. I didn't want to know what was crashing through the underbrush, what had moved that mongoose, tied it up, and left it hanging there like a sick warning. Maria tripped. She hit the ground hard with a strangled cry, and I barely managed to stop myself from stumbling over her. I yanked her up, my heart hammering against my ribs. Come on, I urged, my voice barely above a whisper, afraid that if I spoke too loudly, whatever was out there would come closer. She wobbled on her feet, but we didn't stop. The jungle pressed in around us, shadows shifting with every movement, and I realized something terrifying. The sun was going down. The golden glow that had filtered through the canopy was gone, replaced by dim, eerie twilight. The air felt thicker, heavy, like it was trying to smother us. We weren't far from the trailhead now. I could hear distant traffic, civilization, safety. But then, another sound. A whisper. Low, guttural, just behind me. I didn't think. I grabbed Maria and shoved her forward. Run. She didn't ask questions. She took off, stumbling, half blind with fear. I turned, just for a second, and I saw it. A figure stood just beyond the trees, deep in the shadows. I couldn't make out a face, just a tall, thin shape, barely visible through the dense foliage. And then it moved. Not like a person. Not like anything I'd ever seen. It shifted too quickly, too fluidly, as if it wasn't entirely solid. Then it dropped to all fours and lunged. I turned and ran. My feet barely touched the ground. I could hear something skittering behind me, unnatural, wrong. My chest burned, my legs screamed, but I kept running. Maria was ahead of me now, barely keeping her balance as she sprinted toward the barricade. The moment I saw it, the wooden sign marking the entrance, I felt something sharp graze the back of my neck. A hand? Claws? I didn't know. I just knew I was about to die. Then Maria collapsed into someone. A ranger. An older man, uniformed, very real. The second I saw him, I nearly sobbed with relief. Maria was crying, clinging to his arm, trying to explain. I turned back, but there was nothing behind us. The jungle was silent, still, as if nothing had ever been there at all. The ranger looked us over, eyes narrowing at the fear on our faces. You two aren't supposed to be here. Maria sucked in a shaky breath. As something was in there. I turned back to the trail. My whole body felt like it was vibrating. There was nothing. No movement, no shifting shadows. Just the trees, swaying slightly in the wind. And then I noticed the mongoose was gone. Start from the beginning, the ranger said, his voice calm but serious. I told him everything. About the mongoose, about the scream, about the thing that chased us. Maria nodded frantically, adding details I had already half forgotten in the panic. The ranger's expression darkened. He told us to follow him back to the station. The small outpost was a short walk away, nestled by the main road. Inside, another ranger was sitting at a desk, his radio crackling with static. The older ranger gestured for us to sit. Tell me again, he said, his voice steady. So we did. Every detail. Every awful, inexplicable moment. And when we finished, he exchanged a look with the other ranger. A look that made my stomach drop. They knew something. Finally, the older ranger exhaled and rubbed his temples. You shouldn't have gone in there. No kidding, I muttered. He shook his head. I mean, you really shouldn't have gone in there. That trail's been closed for months. There were incidents. Incidents, Maria whispered. The second ranger hesitated. Then, reluctantly, he pulled out a folder from the desk. Inside were photos. Not of people, not of anything I recognized. Of animals. Dead animals. Headless. Drained. Some strung up in trees, just like the mongoose. Maria made a choked sound and turned away. I forced myself to keep looking. The dates on the photos went back almost a year. Who did this? I asked. The rangers were silent. Finally, the older one said, we don't know. And then, in a quieter voice, we don't think it's a person. My blood turned ice. Maria let out a shaky breath. What do you mean? The ranger glanced at the door, as if checking to make sure it was locked. Some of the bodies we found were wrong. Not just killed, emptied. I stared at him, waiting for him to elaborate. He didn't. Finally, the younger ranger cleared his throat. Look, you're both okay. That's what matters. But don't ever come back here, understand? Maria nodded so fast she looked dizzy. The older ranger stood and opened the door. We'll take you back to the main road. After that, go home. And don't, he hesitated. Don't talk about this. Maria and I didn't argue. We just left. Her mom picked us up 20 minutes later. We didn't tell her what happened. We didn't tell anyone. A few weeks later, Maria and I broke up. Nothing dramatic. Just life. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about that scream. The one that didn't belong to either of us. And I wonder, if we hadn't run fast enough, would someone else have heard a new one? Would someone else, someday, hear mine? Spring break was supposed to be relaxing. Just me and my closest friends, Jackson, Ariel, and Isabel, camping on a secluded stretch of beach in Alabama. No crowds, no loud bars, no overpriced drinks. Just the four of us, the ocean, and a sky full of stars. That was the plan. We arrived later than expected, well past sunset. The drive had taken longer than we thought, and by the time we parked in the lot, the sky was a deep, velvety black. The only sound was the distant crash of waves. The place was empty. Too empty. I thought you said fishermen sometimes camp out here, Ariel asked, pulling her hoodie tighter around herself. Isabel, who had grown up a few hours away and claimed to know the area well, glanced around uneasily. They do, she said. Just not tonight, I guess. We should have taken that as a warning. Jackson and I started unloading the gear while Isabel and Ariel grabbed the cooler. My dog, Bean, a muscular Doberman with an endless supply of energy, bolted across the sand, digging his paws into the soft earth, rolling around, tail wagging. He loved the beach. For a while, things felt normal, peaceful even. We pitched our tents close to the dunes, just beyond the high tide line, and set up a small fire. The warmth from the flames flickered over our faces as we cracked open beers and settled into the moment. That's when the car showed up. At first, I didn't think much of it. Just an old, beat-up SUV creeping down the narrow access road that ran parallel to the dunes. I figured it was a lost tourist or maybe some locals heading somewhere. But then it drove by again. And again, Ariel was the first to say something. Is it just me, or has that car passed like 3 times? I turned. She was right. The same rusted SUV rolled past slowly, its headlights dim, its windows too dark to see inside. Maybe they're looking for a parking spot, Jackson offered, though he didn't sound convinced. Bean had stopped playing. His ears perked up, body tense. His gaze followed the car like a predator watching its prey. The SUV vanished around a bend in the road. Silence settled over us. We shook it off, tried to enjoy ourselves. We laughed, told stories, teased each other over bad drinking habits. But the unease lingered. Then the SUV came back. This time it stopped. The driver's door creaked open. A tall man stepped out. I couldn't make out his face in the dim light, but something about him was wrong. His movements were stiff, jerky, like he wasn't entirely sure how to move his own limbs. And then, as he started walking toward us, I noticed something else. He was limping. Isabel grabbed my arm. What is he doing? Jackson and I stood. Let's go talk to him, I muttered. We approached slowly, Bean trotting beside me, his lips curled back in a silent snarl. The man didn't stop, didn't even hesitate. I cleared my throat. Hey, everything okay? The man tilted his head slightly, as if confused by the question. Then he spoke. You're on my property. His voice was rough, slurred, like he was drunk. I frowned. I thought this was public land. He didn't answer. He just stared. Then, with a sudden jerk, he pulled something from his pocket. A knife. I barely had time to react before he lunged. Bean exploded forward, a blur of muscle and fury. He slammed into the man's arm, teeth sinking into his wrist. The guy screamed, stumbling backward, dropping the knife. I yelled, Bean, back, afraid the man would hurt him. But my dog was trained. He let go immediately, sprinting back to my side, his teeth bared, a low growl rattling in his chest. The man scrambled to his feet. His breath came in ragged gasps. He glared at us for a long, tense moment, then turned and sprinted back to the SUV. The car roared to life. The tires spun in the sand before peeling away, vanishing into the night. We stood there, stunned. What the actual hell was that? Ariel whispered. Jackson bent down, picking up the knife. He was going to use this, he murmured, running a thumb over the blade. Should we call the police? Isabel asked. I hesitated. Let's just get out of here. We packed up fast. Faster than I thought possible. The problem was, we still had to walk back to the car. And that meant taking the same path the SUV had just disappeared down. We gathered our stuff, keeping close together. Bean was still on edge, ears twitching at every sound. My stomach twisted at the thought of the man waiting for us. Watching. Halfway to the parking lot, I saw them. Slashed tires. My car was wrecked. I cursed under my breath. The guy must have done it before approaching us. This wasn't random. He had planned this. Ariel grabbed my arm. What do we do now? Jackson was already pulling out his phone. We're calling the cops. Right now. I nodded. There was no other choice. While we waited for them to arrive, we stood in a tight circle, backs to each other. Every shadow felt like it was moving. Every distant sound felt like footsteps. The minutes dragged. Then, finally, flashing red and blue lights. A uniformed officer stepped out, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Someone want to tell me what's going on? We explained everything, the man, the knife, the car, the tires. Then the officer did something that made my blood run cold. He unholstered his gun. Open the trunk, he said. My throat went dry. Why? He didn't answer. Just gestured for me to do it. Hands shaking, I pressed the button. The trunk popped open with a soft click. The officer shone his light inside. For a second, I thought we were in the clear. Then he froze. And I saw it. Something was stuffed in the corner. Crumpled, barely visible beneath my camping gear. A plastic bag. With something inside. Something that looked like hair. I stepped back so fast I almost tripped. That wasn't there before, I stammered. The officer's face darkened. Get back, he ordered. Now. I watched, heart pounding, as he reached into the trunk. He pulled the bag open. Then he cursed. Inside was a wig. A blonde one. And underneath it, a mask. A rubber mask of a human face. We weren't dealing with some drunk lunatic. We were dealing with something much worse. The officer didn't move for what felt like an eternity. His flashlight beam stayed locked on the plastic bag in my trunk, its edges curled open just enough to reveal the disturbing contents, a blonde wig and a mask. A human face. Not real, but made of rubber. Stretched, expressionless, unnatural. I felt sick. That wasn't there before, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My hands trembled at my sides. I swear to God, that was not there before. The officer turned to me, his face unreadable. Are you saying someone put this in your car? Yes, I croaked. I don't know how. I don't know when. Jackson took a shaky step forward, eyes darting between me and the officer. That guy. The one with the knife. Maybe while we were setting up camp. The officer exhaled sharply, then reached for his radio. Unit 4, requesting backup. Possible evidence of premeditation. Suspect may still be in the area. That last part hit me like a punch to the gut. The man could still be here, watching us, waiting. Ariel sucked in a breath, wrapping her arms around herself. Isabel looked like she was trying to keep herself from throwing up. I felt Bean press against my leg, ears flattened, still on high alert. The officer turned back to us. Did this man say anything else to you? I swallowed, shaking my head. Just that we were on his property. Which isn't true, Isabel added quickly. This is public land. The officer muttered something under his breath, then looked past us, his gaze shifting toward the dark dunes, the trees beyond. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. We've had reports of a guy like this before. Same car, same description. Always harassing campers, but he's never been violent before. I stared at him. You mean, he's done this before? The officer nodded grimly. But we've never caught him. He gestured toward the trunk. This is new. I felt dizzy. The night air was too thick, too warm, like it was suffocating me. Someone had put that mask in my car, and I had no idea when or how. The thought made my stomach twist. Had he been watching us the whole time? Had he slipped into the parking lot before we arrived, knowing we'd eventually find our way back to the car? Or worse, had he been inside my car at some point? The officer slammed the trunk shut. We're going to process this for fingerprints. But for now, I need you all to stay put until backup arrives. We stood there in a tight group, unmoving. The night felt different now. heavy with a presence we couldn't see. Every shifting shadow in the dunes, every rustling tree made my heart hammer in my chest. I couldn't stop thinking about that mask. Why did he have it? What was he planning to do with it? And then I thought of something even worse. That knife. The one he didn't take with him when he ran. He had been armed, ready to use it. And yet, something had changed his plan. Or someone. Bean. My dog had saved us. Had he not attacked? Had he not knocked the knife away? Would that man have kept coming? Would he have? Would he have used it? A cold shiver ran down my spine. 10 minutes passed before the second patrol car arrived. 2 more officers stepped out, their presence making me feel a little safer, but not much. One of them, a tall, broad man with a deep voice, took our statements while the other examined my car with the first officer. They found more slash marks, not just on the tires, but on the door handles, like someone had been testing them, trying to get inside. Isabel turned pale. "Oh my God. We're gonna need to tow this," the officer muttered. "You guys got anyone to call?" "I have roadside assistance," I said weakly. My voice felt like it belonged to someone else. While Jackson helped me arrange for a tow truck, Ariel pulled me aside. Her eyes were wide, her voice low. Do you think he wanted to take someone?" I stared at her. I didn't want to answer. Didn't want to put the thought into words. But deep down, I knew. He wasn't just scaring us. He wasn't just some drunk lunatic. He was hunting. And tonight, we had almost been his prey. It took another hour before we were finally able to leave. Jackson rode with me in the tow truck, while Ariel and Isabel took an Uber to a motel a few towns over. None of us wanted to stay near that beach. I barely spoke on the ride. My mind wouldn't stop replaying the night, the man's slow, jerky movements, the knife, the mask, the slashed tires. How long had he been planning this? And more importantly, would he try again? The next morning, I called the police department to follow up. They hadn't found him. The SUV was gone. No trace of him remained. The only thing they had were fingerprints on the mask. And then, a few days later, I got a call back. The fingerprints didn't match anyone in the system. No prior arrests. No record. Whoever this man was, he was a ghost. And he was still out there. I never went back to that beach. None of us did. We stopped talking about it after a while, pretending it had just been a bad night, an unlucky encounter. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder, what if he had succeeded? What if we hadn't fought back? What if Bean hadn't been there? And the worst question of all, how many people never got away? The first time I saw Will, he looked like the kind of guy you meet on vacation and tell yourself is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He was handsome, with a neatly trimmed beard, deep brown eyes, and an accent I couldn't quite place. Charming, in the effortless way that makes you forget to be cautious. And above all, confident. The kind of man who walks up to 2 women sunbathing on Miami Beach and knows he'll walk away with a phone number. And somehow, that number was mine. My best friend Michelle and I had flown to Miami for spring break, just the 2 of us. It was supposed to be carefree, a weekend of sun, drinks, and the kind of fun we could only have in our 20s. We rented a house in Wynwood, a little removed from the chaos of South Beach, but close enough that we could still party. That first day, we lounged on the beach for hours, sipping overpriced drinks and rejecting the groups of guys who cycled through like sharks sniffing for blood. But then Will appeared. He was different. He wasn't part of a pack. He wasn't trying too hard. He just strolled over, flashed a perfect smile, and asked me, "What's a beautiful girl like you doing in a place like this?" I rolled my eyes at the line, but I still laughed. We talked for a few minutes. His words smooth, but never pushy. He asked about our plans, mentioned he had a friend, suggested we should all grab drinks later. Before I could second-guess myself, I gave him my number. And then he was gone, just like that. Michelle and I watched him disappear into the crowd. He didn't stop to talk to any other women. He didn't look back. That should have been my first warning sign. That night, we pre-gamed at our rental. Around 8 p.m., Will and his friend Ken arrived. I had expected Ken to be a little awkward, a little disappointing compared to Will's easy charm. But he wasn't. He was just as good-looking, just as well-dressed. When Michelle saw him, her entire demeanor changed, her teasing jealousy from earlier replaced by interest. They brought their own liquor. Something about that unsettled me. It's not like we asked them to. We already had plenty of drinks. But they set the bottle on the counter as if it was part of the plan. Still, we drank, laughed, let the warmth of vodka and tequila loosen our nerves. They were perfect. Too perfect. At some point, Michelle and King got cozier, leaving me alone with Will. He leaned in close, his voice low, and asked, "What's your favorite drink?" "Tequila soda," I said without thinking. His lips curved into a knowing smile. "We'll get you one at the bar," he said. And that's when I should have left. We ended up at a bar a few blocks from our rental. Small, crowded, loud. The kind of place where it's easy to disappear. Michelle and Kin drifted to the other side of the room, leaving me alone with Will. He placed his hand on my lower back, steering me toward the bar. "Let me get you that drink," he said. I excused myself to go to the bathroom first. I was buzzed, not drunk, but something about the night felt off, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. I took my time, letting the cool bathroom air sober me up a little. When I finally stepped out, I noticed Will standing at the bar, and he was hovering over my drink. His body was angled slightly toward it, his hand moving near the rim. My stomach dropped. I took a slow step to the side, trying to get a better view. He was doing something subtle, precise. And then I saw it. The quick flick of his fingers. The way he tilted the drink slightly toward himself. I froze. The bar was packed. People were laughing, drinking, oblivious. But I knew. I had seen enough. I turned around and walked out. Outside, the night air was thick and humid, but I barely noticed. My heart was hammering. My thoughts were racing. I pulled out my phone and texted Michelle. "Me, where are you?" No response. I checked my messages again. "Me, Michelle, answer me now." Nothing. My stomach clenched. I could still hear the muffled music from inside the bar. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe he was just checking his phone. But every instinct screamed that I needed to leave. I glanced back toward the bar entrance. Will still hadn't noticed I was gone. I took off down the sidewalk, heading toward our rental as fast as I could. And then my phone buzzed. "Michelle, why do you think he was drugging you?" My blood ran cold. She was with Ken. She wasn't worried. She wasn't answering my calls. I typed as fast as I could. "Me, because I saw him put something in my drink. We need to leave now." "Michelle, maybe he was just on his phone." I wanted to scream. I called her. Straight to voicemail. I started running. By the time I reached the rental, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely punch in the code for the door lock. The second it clicked open, I slammed it shut behind me and locked it. My breathing was ragged. My head was spinning, but I knew one thing for certain. I was never seeing Will again. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, willing Michelle to call me back. Minutes passed. Then, a text. From Michelle's number. "Michelle, open the back door. Hurry. He's coming." My entire body went numb. I stared at the message, my mind struggling to process the words. "He's coming." I stood slowly, my feet like lead as I walked to the back door. My hand hovered over the lock. Something wasn't right. Something was wrong. I pressed my ear against the door, listening. Nothing. Then my phone buzzed again. "Michelle, hurry. Please. He's right behind me." I took a step back. My breathing turned shallow. Something in my gut screamed at me to stop. I didn't open the door. Instead, I ran to the front and peered through the peephole. And that's when I saw him. Will, standing just to the side of the front door, waiting. I stumbled back from the peephole, my breath catching in my throat. Will was outside, not knocking, not calling my name, just waiting. His body was half hidden by the shadow of the porch light, but I could see the outline of him, tall, unmoving, patient. My phone buzzed again. "Michelle, hurry. Open the back door." I swallowed hard. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. That wasn't Michelle texting me. I looked back toward the rear of the house. The back door had no peephole, no windows. If I had opened it just now, I wouldn't have known who was really standing there until it was too late. My stomach twisted violently. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. Think. Another buzz. "Michelle, he's coming back to the front. Please, I'm scared." It was bait. A trap. And suddenly, I wasn't just scared for myself, I was terrified for Michelle. Where was she? Was she even okay? I forced my fingers to move, dialing her number again. Straight to voicemail. I started shaking my head, whispering, "No, no, no." Then, another sound, the doorknob rattling. I choked on a gasp. Will was trying to get in. I did the only thing I could think of. I called the police. I dropped to my knees behind the couch as the line rang, my pulse hammering so loudly I could barely hear. 911. "What's your emergency?" "My friend is missing," I whispered, my voice shaking. And there's a man outside my house, he won't leave. I barely got the words out before I heard a click. Not from my phone. From the front door handle. I whipped my head toward the door, my heart nearly stopping. It had automatically locked, but he was trying codes. He was trying to get in. The operator must have heard the panic in my silence because her voice sharpened. "Ma'am, are you safe?" "No," I whispered. "He's trying the code lock." I heard the shuffle of papers. "What's your address?" I barely managed to get it out before another text popped up on my screen. "Michelle, I see you in the window. Why won't you let me in?" My body went ice cold. I wasn't near a window. I hadn't looked outside. That meant whoever was texting me was lying. And if they were lying, that meant the hand on the lock wasn't Will's. There were two of them. My vision blurred with panic. I was trapped. "I need you to stay on the line," the operator was saying. "Officers are nearby." I couldn't respond. I was too focused on the front door. The handle jiggled again, and I heard a soft chuckle. Then footsteps. Moving away. For a second, I thought they were leaving, that it was over. But then bang. The back door shook violently. I screamed. They were trying to break in. I scrambled backward, knocking over a lamp, my hands flying to my mouth to stifle my own breathing. I heard the operator saying something, but I could barely process it over the blood rushing in my ears. Then sirens. Loud. Close. The banging stopped. The footsteps disappeared. I heard the distant screech of tires. By the time the police arrived, they were gone. I was still shaking when the officers cleared the house. I told them everything, the drinks, the texts, the way Michelle had disappeared with Ken. And then, the worst part, the texts weren't from her. The officer frowned. "You're sure?" I nodded numbly. She wouldn't say those things. And she wasn't answering her phone. The cop sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You said she left with the guy named Ken, right?" "Yes." He exchanged a look with his partner. "We need to find her. Now." It took 2 hours before they found Michelle. She had been wandering the streets, barefoot, crying, drunk out of her mind. She had no phone, no memory of how she got there. When they brought her back to the house, I ran to her, grabbing her shoulders. "Michelle, what happened? Are you okay?" Her eyes were glazed, unfocused. I don't remember," she mumbled. "We were drinking and then I woke up in an alley. I felt like I was going to be sick." "Where's Ken?" I asked. She flinched at the name, looking down. "I don't know." One of the officers stepped forward. "A couple found her wandering near a gas station. We'll check security footage, but whoever took her phone, they used it to lure you." My stomach dropped. "So it wasn't just Will?" I asked. The officer's expression hardened. "No, it wasn't just him." The next few days were a blur. The police took statements. The bar pulled surveillance footage. And that's when I learned the truth. Will and Ken weren't their real names. The police ran the phone number Will had given me. It was registered to another stolen phone. Both men had used fake names. And the most terrifying part? They had done this before. The cops suspected they targeted women during spring break. Picked them out at bars, charmed them, drugged them. Most of the time, the victims never reported it. Some never even realized what had happened. We had just been lucky. Michelle had managed to escape somehow. Whether she had woken up too soon, or they had gotten spooked, we didn't know. All I knew was that if I had opened that door, I wouldn't be here. The police never caught them. The bar footage showed their faces, but no one knew who they were. Ghosts. Men who came into the city, did what they did, and disappeared before anyone could track them. Michelle and I cut the trip short. We never went back to Miami. To this day, I wonder how many other women they've done this to. How many never got away. And worst of all, I wonder what would have happened if I had taken that drink.